That's great. Thank you, Paul. So yeah, welcome everyone. Today we'll be covering the implications of the 2025 PTSN switch off. So I'm Laura Walkinshaw. I'm here today representing the Digital Essex team at Essex County Council. I've also got my colleagues Josh and Paul on the call who will be assisting me today and who you'll be hearing from shortly. So just to start, I wanted to run through some housekeeping with everyone. So Paul, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Brilliant, thank you. So as mentioned, today's session will be recorded and we'll be sending around the link afterwards. So if you want to share that with your colleagues, you're able to. If everyone could keep their microphones muted and camera off unless they're speaking, that would be really appreciated. And as I meant, and finally, we'll be running a Q&A on Slido. So to access Slido, Paul, if you go to the next slide, please. There is a QR code here. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback from someone. So yeah, if you scan the QR code here, or if you go to slido.com and if you just enter the code switch over in the join as a participant box. Brilliant. Sorry, Councillor Lyon, you've got your hand up. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm trying to do the right thing. I can't see any of the content that you're displaying. It says content can't be displayed, unable to download the file. So I'm not sure what's going on there. But
is anyone else having that problem? No, seems okay for everyone else.
No, it's all okay for me.
Yeah, I can see it. Okay, Councillor Lyon, would it be helpful if we just email over a copy of the presentation to you?
Yeah, that'll be good. I don't know whether it's my iPad, but yeah, it could be. All right, yeah, no problem.
Yeah, Josh or Paul, would you be able to do that for Councillor Lyon, please? Thank you. And Councillor Lyon, if you've got any other issues or if it doesn't come through, just let us know, okay?
Okay.
Okay, brilliant. So yeah, the Slido details will be posted into the chat if they haven't already. But yeah, just to say, if you could use the Slido Q&A function rather than the Teams Q&A function, and we'll be going throughout the call answering those. And we'll also be getting to lots of the questions in the Q&A panel at the end of the call. Okay, brilliant. So now just moving on to the agenda. So next slide, please, Paul. So following this introduction from me, we'll be hearing from John from Openreach, then we'll be hearing from David from Virgin Media O2, and then we'll be having a 30-minute Q&A, which will be run by my colleague Josh. And in addition to John and David, we'll have 4 other industry professionals with us who will be sharing their valuable insights. So before we hear from John, I just wanted to provide an update from Essex County Council and share some of the things we're currently actioning with regards to the digital switchover. Paul, are you able to go over to the next slide, please? Lovely, thank you. So this includes a single regional awareness and information campaign, and through that we're hoping to reach both residents and businesses. We'll be building on the LGA toolkit to reach our most vulnerable residents and those who are digitally excluded. We'll also be lobbying Ofcom. As a county, we'll be creating a single response to Ofcom to communicate the need for there to be greater national support and funding on the digital switchover due to the impact it's going to have. And finally, digital inclusion analysis. We're suggesting analysis to identify the types of people most likely to be affected by the switchover. And our intention is to use this insight to engage with these individuals in the best way. So yeah, just before we move on to John, I just wanted to say again, please use Slido. Yeah, take the opportunity to ask any questions you'd like, and we'll get to those. And I'll now hand over to my colleague Paul, who will be introducing John Livermore from Openreach. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoy today's session.
Thank you, Laura. I'll just try and line up the slide if I can. Right, sorry. Okay, hopefully everybody can see the slide still. Thank you, Laura, and good morning, everyone. I'm very very pleased to introduce our first speaker, John Livermore, who is the All IP Industry Engagement Manager from Openreach. John has been working at BT for over 24 years and has been with Openreach for the last 3, leading on the All IP rollout into the UK communications network with industry, including the critical national infrastructure. John is going to be talking about the upcoming analog to digital switchover, which is now just over 2 years away from completion. So it's coming up fast, and he's going to cover the implications that it will have for us all. So over to you, John. And also, John, do you want to drive your own slides, or would you like me to do that?
Well, first of all, can you hear me okay? Make sure we get a sound check. Can you hear me okay? Okay, right, okay. There was a horrible moment there. Freezy. Okay, just to check, these I've got my slides separately here, and I'm happy to drive them. I can also see there's a left and right tab at the bottom of the screen. So can I drive them from that as well? I'll give it a go. There we are. Yes, I think I can. So yeah, what I'll do is, if you leave it as it is, Paul, then I'll just use your slides and just tab forward on them. Is that okay? Does that make life easier for you?
It will, but I think I'm still seeing slide 7.
Oh, okay. Well, I've got 8 up at the moment. Can anyone else? What can you see? Hopefully, you can see my name there, and the chap who's very happy with his mobile phone. Can anyone see that?
No,
It's still on 7.
Yeah,
Right, okay. Let me just see if I can click it. Remember, this is your technology, not mine, so you can't blame me for this one. Oh, I've gone to 9 now. Anyone see 9?
No.
People should be able to move it over themselves as well. There is that option.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what I'll do then. Let me actually, if I can, present my slides. That might be the easiest thing to do, because otherwise they're going to be in the wrong order. So bear with me for a sec, folks, and I'll try and share my own slides rather than trying to pinch pause rather. Put some nice ones there. Let's see if we can do a share screen that way. Okay, so now I'm trying to share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Right, okie dokie. So thank you very much indeed. Let's just minimize that so we can do that. And let me just make that a bit bigger, so hopefully you can see that. So let's just go back a stage. So thank you very much indeed. This is a 40-minute section, I think, which kind of you're probably groaning, thinking, oh no, that's an awful lot there. Let's just do a little bit of introduction for myself. I think one of the emails actually said from BT. So I'm not from Openreach, as Paul made clear. Why is that important? A lot of people say BT Openreach, and once a long time ago it was. The reason is because Openreach are very much now, just and have been for some years, an engineering company. So we are the engineering company that basically connect the customer's premises back to the local telephone exchange. We do the bit in the middle. Effectively, once on would there, our customers are some 690 communications providers. So they're people like Sky and BT and TalkTalk and Gamma and Vodafone, and now I'm running out, but there's 690 of them out there, and they are our customers. So the great thing is I can't sell you anything today. Don't feel any threat. I've got nothing to sell you. I think there are colleagues today here from BT. And after I finish, I'll be passing on to David Christie from Virgin. Virgin are our mortal enemies, of course. They're our competitors, but actually we get on incredibly well because this is really important. And they've got their own 2025 deadline as well for their own network. And that's all I'm going to say about it, not my position. Dave will talk about that separately. So we're talking in this slot totally about the network maintained by Openreach, the lines in the street, as I said, to start with a telephone exchange and end at a socket inside the premises. Now, when we talk about premises, really expand your mind. Think about your own house. Think about your neighbours. Think about your relatives. Think about your elderly ones, your loved ones, but also think about everything you have in the council. Every council in the UK, and I deal with 400 of you out there. So Essex, in fact, nice to see you today in my home county. But in fact, I've also dealing with everything from Staffordshire, Derbyshire, all of Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland as well. Trying very hard to get around those local authorities. It's painful because you've got to do them one by one. I know the LGA have been doing a lot of work on this and we're seeing some success. But the local authorities are really important. And the reason for that is this switch off that we're talking about today, there is no national campaign. There's never been planned a national campaign. It would be much easier if there was. However, there are lots of reasons why there won't be. Some of those reasons are around the fact that some operators are not affected by this. So therefore, their argument, of course, is we don't tell people that it's all going to affect everyone because it won't affect our customers. Some customers have already moved over to the new system. So the argument is we don't upset them, making them rush off to their provider to ask them the questions that are unnecessary. There's also commercial sensitivity because this change is being done by every provider individually. So from our point of view, the network has changed. It is already there to consume. And although we will work absolutely closely with our customers, those 690 communications providers, you will know them as the phone company, the ISP, the service provider, call it what you will. They're the folks that take our money at home, at the business and so on. It is those individual companies that will decide when this switch takes place. So let's just get a few thoughts in terms of what's happening and when it's happening. Stick with me for the moment on the left-hand side of this slide. You can see a big grey box, and in that grey box, that is the telephone exchange building. There are 5,500 telephone exchanges in the UK. They've been around for a very long time. They, of course, had mechanical exchanges some time ago, but 40 years ago, in the 1980s, this black box appears on our chart. That black box is known to us as wholesale line rental, or the PSTN. Effectively, if you're taking notes, if you want to know, wholesale line rental is a product name that Openreach used to sell to our customers, those providers I talked about, and it stands for wholesale line rental. We'll come to what that stands for, but the actual black box itself signifies this 1980s equipment, which when it went in was called System X, and that System X equipment is old. It is dying on its feet. And it is that reason that this whole thing goes about. It wasn't just let's do something clever. This was about an absolute necessity. So way back in 2017, BT Group, because although we talked about Openreach being completely different, BT Group is an entity in its own right, and BT Consumer is a communications provider, and BT Business is a communications provider, and they're all separate companies, standalone companies in their own right. So when you say BT, this big blob, it isn't. It really is more complicated than that. But to keep it simple, it is BT Group that own the telephone exchange buildings. It is Openreach that maintain the equipment for the BT equipment, this black box you can see here. But you also notice that in total telephone exchanges over the years, other providers have provided this blue box, indicates companies like Sky and TalkTalk, who put their own equipment in. It wasn't in the 1980s, it was much more recent, in the last 20 years maybe. And that equipment is staying past 2025. How long for? We don't know. That is not in our gift to share that. We don't have the information because both Sky and TalkTalk own that equipment and will do their own thing.
No, why aren't my headphones working?
I don't know why your headphones are working, but thanks for sharing. Not my forte. In terms of this, going back to our black box, then that's what's being switched off. BT Group went to Ofcom and to what was then the DCMS, now DCIT, and said, look, the equipment is dying on its feet. We would like to close it down. And a 7-year notice period was given, hence why the 2025 date is so important. And we also said we'd quite like to stop selling new connections to this equipment, because each time we take a new connection to this equipment, ultimately we're going to end up making the problem bigger. In fact, we had to give 5 years notice to industry to let them know that this was going to happen. From that point of view, I think someone's still not on mute, by the way. And so therefore, we have found ourselves with a date just last month of the 5th of September 2023, which became a national stop sell date for this older product. So let's just get a few dates clear in our mind. Starting 2018, 2025, at the end of 2025 is the switch off of this black box, this System X equipment, that 1980s equipment. It's going to be switched off at the end of 2025. We had to keep on selling it in most parts of the country until fairly recently, and from the 5th of last month, we can finally say to folks, I'm sorry, we can't sell you any more of that stuff. In the meantime, Openreach have been absolutely rolling out tons and tons of fibre. So what do we mean by fibre? Fibre is glass. It's effectively thin strands of glass, and that is the replacement. It is not a like-for-like replacement. It terminates on that illustration on this green box, and that is known in our parlance as the fibre head end. Again, there's no reason for you to know that. From our point of view, we move you from the black box to the green box, and that's what we want to get to. When will that happen? Now, from our point of view, it's already there. So if someone says to you, oh, when is my street or my exchange going to go digital? It's already happened. You missed it. It's already out there. And digital can be a bit of a misnomer anyway, because in fact the exchanges back in the 1980s were digital. By digital, we're saying that actually things are moving to a fibre network. It is a different technology. It's not analog. It is a digital IP technology. You've probably heard terms like VoIP, voice over IP. And it means, in essence, that when you move any line, whatever's at the end of it, whether that is your home phone, a fax machine, whether it's the burglar alarm at the swimming pool, whether it's the fire alarm down at the local library, whether that's a lift phone that actually is there for emergencies, whether that's your car park barriers, and the list goes on and on and on. Councils usually have between 200 and 300 use cases, stuff that at this moment you may not have even thought about, or you may be well way along in auditing your estate. But ultimately, take this point: the old system was an all copper line, and you can see that on this yellow line that runs all the way through this orange line. That is what the old system is. It's an all copper line. There's the System X on the black box. That switched off in 2025. We would very much like everybody to move over to something that is attached to our green box, and that's fibre. Two flavours of fibre. Fibre to the premises, I'm sure you've heard that expression, FTTP. You can see from our purple line here, that is an all glass fibre line all the way through. Huge advantages, so there are some advantages to all of this. Isn't just challenges. Much bigger packets of data. You can do all sorts of things, biometrics. NHS start to get the benefit of examining people at home potentially, all that stuff. Glass doesn't care so much about water. So if you get water into a junction box, metal doesn't like it. Glass doesn't really care. So lots of advantages, but it is a different system, and therefore there are challenges. Fibre to the cabinet is what most of us will have sitting outside our front door and our business now. Fibre to the cabinet covers about 95% of the UK from an Openreach perspective, and is a half and half solution. It means that we leave that copper in situ between the big green street cabinet and your premises, but we've added in that purple line, which we know as fibre to the cabinet, or when it's converted to something called SOGA or SOGEA. So in a nutshell, we're trying to get people from the black box to the green one. That is a fibre type service, at least part fibre, and therefore there is a challenge. Why is there a challenge? Because the old system is metal, it's copper all the way through, and as a byproduct of that, there is a voltage that comes down that line all the time, 24/7. If you have a power cut in your premises, then that carries on working today. But when you are migrated by your provider, you will no longer have access, quite simply because you can't put power down a piece of glass. And therefore, we are going to a world of routers. If you have a typical line today, and let's use an example of a lift, you've got a lift in the council premises, that lift may have an emergency phone in it. What you can't see is above the lift car, there's a big long copper wire supplied by the lift company or the provider, the comms, whoever it is. It goes up probably to some motor room at the top of the stairs, top of the lift, and then inside the motor room, you end up with a basic white socket that you've all got at home anyway. And what happens is that phone then plugs into that. Now, suddenly, that lift is going to need a router to make it work, because now it moves to fibre to the cabinet, for example. That means that suddenly somebody has got to go up into that motor room. They've got to unplug the existing equipment. They've got to take the router that's been provided by the phone company, put that in instead, and then hope, and it depends on which company as to whether you get this or not, that that particular company is providing you with some kind of analog port on the back of the router, and that when connected, it actually works. There's no guarantee that it's lifting and shifting something that is analog, putting into the back of a digital router, hopefully for the best will work, and therefore it's worthwhile mentioning that challenge, which I'll do a bit more later. So in summary, is what we've got here at the top of this in nice big red writing. There will not be an exchange switchover. It has happened for all intents and purposes. Each CP, communications provider in our parlance, will do their own thing, and the national stop sale happened on the 5th of September. At the end of 2025, that black box is disconnected, but don't get hung up on 2025. That is the end date. You could be contacted at home, in your offices, in your facilities management office, your credit control department. Whoever currently gets the correspondence from your provider today is likely to get some kind of correspondence, either by email, by text, or probably by letter, that says, on this date, we are moving you to a digital service. If you haven't got a router, we are supplying you one. You must connect this on this day. And you also need to ask your providers of hardware, devices, fax machines, whatever it might be, special services is the term we normally use, if it will work with a router. Otherwise, you might need to think about getting new equipment. Put simply, if you think about a typical street that you live in, number 13579, if every one of those different folk have different providers, so one's with Sky, one's with TalkTalk, one's with BT, one's with Vodafone, for example, if they're affected by this, they will all get contacted on different dates. One could be tomorrow, one might be next year, one might be the year after. If you're running a business, the same will happen. If you've got 2 providers, 3 providers, 4 providers, they'll do things at different times. As a local authority, you may have 1 communication provider, you may have 10. They will all do it at different times. The key to start thinking now, if you haven't done already, is who is likely in your organisations to be contacted by your provider. If it's big switchboard stuff and things like that, you've probably got it. You've probably moved it over years ago. You're probably going to talk about SIP trunks and getting rid of ISDNs and stuff like that. And if you've done that, as I suspect you have, fabulous. That's not the stuff that's likely to trip you up. What will trip you up is when you go and audit your whole estate around every department, all those phone sockets, things plugged in, things you've just forgotten are in there. We know some councils, for example, have air conditioning units. They did their audit, found that air conditioning units. The NHS found that had helipads. Well, maybe Essex, you can't afford a helicopter, maybe you have, but ultimately there are helipads out there on top of hospitals that suddenly they found there was a phone line up there, whatever they used it for, and that suddenly needs to have a router. So think about everything. One of the things you'll hear me say time and time again is audit, audit, audit what you've got. Think about everything you've got that's plugged in today, what you use it for. Then ask yourself the question, who is likely to get a letter about this particular line? Will they understand it? Will they think it's marketing bump and throw it in the bin? If they do understand it, are they going to plug this new router in that turns up? If they are, where are they going to get the power from? Is there a 3-pin plug nearby? Can you plug the router in? So there are a number of questions to ask. This is a very simple diagram that just tries to cover every possible premises in the UK.
Sorry, John. Sorry, I did have my hand up. It's Councillor Alan Lyon. Could you go back to the previous slide for me?
Sure, yeah. I should say I can't see any hands, by the way, because I've only got one screen, so apologies. But I was going to take questions at the end,
right.
if that's okay.
Yeah,
if you
I
want to ask
just
your question
wanted a couple of things to clarify, if I may. First of all, what of all the definitions you say SOGEA, don't understand what that means. CP understands service provider.
Okay.
But you said that the cabinet to the home may still be copper, so that's still using DSL.
95% of the UK has fibre to the cabinet today.
Yeah.
That fibre to the cabinet is what you can see on this slide, hopefully. You keep the copper in situ between the cabinet and the premises. The fibre comes in at the other end between the telephone exchange and the cabinet. So you will have copper for years to come. Absolutely.
So DSL will still be there to provide that end user service, are we saying?
So going forward, if you have got a fibre product, fibre to the premises, or
No,
fibre to the cabinet.
No, fibre to the cabinet, right? Cabinet to the home. Currently, it's DSL, yes?
It is if it's all copper. It's
Yes.
VDSL if it's fibre. That's what I was getting to.
Right. So the
DSL is a very, don't use the term DSL. It's either ADSL or VDSL.
Well, I know both because I worked on it, but just wanted to check. So that DSL function will still be in place.
Yes. So effectively,
right.
You're going to end up with 3 possible scenarios here. You're going to end up with a line that's fibre all the way through.
Yeah.
You may get stuck with a line that is still copper all the way through because there's no fibre there in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
And you are also going to have a half and half, which is fibre to the cabinet.
Okay.
Okay. Let me come back on your question about what SOGEA is. If you look at what you've got today, and I'll use my own home as an example. So I've got fibre to the cabinet. That means I've still got my copper line, as you can see here on the top of this slide, all the way back to the exchange. My wall sockets, which I was going to show you on the slide here, which I will just pop over, my wall sockets all go back to that equipment in the exchange that's being switched off. Okay. But when I use my router in my home, I jump off at the cabinet and I go through to the fibre network and I'm using VDSL. Okay. I have got to get off that black box by the end of 2025. So my provider will say to me, John, it's time to move you over. What they will do on that day of migration is actually just disconnect me, as you can see there, from that bit. So in fact, I then lose my copper link all the way back to the exchange, and therefore my wall sockets go dead. And that's the key thing to remember here. On the day of your migration, the wall sockets in your premises, whether it's a lift shaft, whether it's in your home, whatever it is, they all go dead. The only thing that is working is your master socket, and what it's giving you is broadband. Hence why you must have a router. And if you've got something in an extension socket, think about an elderly person. They use their phone by the side of the bed and it's an extension socket. They will end up with a router in their master socket. Anything they use must now be plugged into that master socket through a router. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I follow it. I worked on this at BT, so I understand.
I was going to say to you, you sound like an ex-BT person. Will I be right in saying that? They're always the most argumentative, usually.
Yeah, well, just a bit of clarity, so
No.
for other people. So, and I was thinking of ISDN, Megastream, Killerstream. I don't know whether you still got Megastream and Killerstream.
ISDN, yeah, Megastream, Killerstream's all been. It's pretty much, as far as I know, it's not my thing, but it's all. It's a kind of BT product all gone, and ISDN absolutely goes as part of this. ISDN sits on the PSTN. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thanks. Sorry to
interrupt. No, it's okay. So I always recognise an ex-BT person. I was off the NHS the other day. I thought, yeah, I bet you only was. So that's no bad thing. It's just the fact that it's interesting questions come through. Let's just go back to let's pick up on your point, because I think it's a really interesting point to make clear. All of this is, you can walk away from this and say, well, the bloke wasted my time, not a gobbledygook I wasn't interested in. Just take this very simple thought, just to reiterate that again. Those different providers, 690, will be the ones that decide. They will be the ones that contact you. They will be the ones that tell you if you're affected and what you've got to do about it. And they will provide you with a new router if necessary. Going back to your point, if it's ADSL today, so a router that's sitting on an all copper line, they will need to convert you to a new router, a VDSL router. ADSL and VDSL are as technical as I get. Okay, so don't ask me lots of technical questions. But effectively, I know the difference is that effectively that box goes on an all copper network. This other box goes on one that's got at least a bit of fibre on it. Do think though about the different scenarios, the use cases that are going to be affected. Telecare. So if you've got adult social care today on the call, if you haven't spoken to us already, I spend half my life talking adult social care. It really will affect your telecare folks out there. Most councils have thousands of folks in their homes with local authorities helping to keep them out of hospital by giving them a healthcare pendant with a telecare device. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a clicky throat. And then the idea is that that individual, the first they will know about this change is when a letter comes from their supplier. And one of the things that a lot of councils have done, and I'm not here to do your job, but it's very useful. Two things that councils have done, in my experience, as I'm working most of them, if you can, I know there's no budget half the time, get a project manager to run all this for you. What they usually do is have a pyramid system. They sit at the top and they go to every department and say, I want you to be expert for your department, you to be expert for your department. Tell me everything we've got. What do you use it for? The next thing they do for adult social care is they reach out very often by whichever method they can. It might be a letter, and again, I appreciate there's cost involved, writing to the individuals that have telecare devices, those healthcare pendants, saying to them, please show this letter to your carers, your relatives. Let them know that the first you may hear about this is your provider will send you a letter, and your provider may know nothing about your vulnerability. They may know nothing about your healthcare pendant and so on. And therefore contact them and let them know that you are in this situation. Otherwise, you could just end up with a letter that you don't understand, a router that turns up, you don't know what to do with it. Then you get switched off and you find that nothing in your home is working. And that is absolutely critical. It is a frightening prospect. And because there is no national campaign, it's the reason we spend a lot of time reaching out to folks, just saying, you as a local authority have got credibility. It very often, even if I go along, so I've got nothing to sell you, people go, yeah, what's the catch? If others go along and trying to sell them stuff, people always think, what's the catch? You as a local authority in your community, just not your own estate, but your whole community will believe the stuff you say. They'll wave their fingers at you and talk about council tax bills, and all they get is their bins and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, they listen to you. We've tried with the LJ previously to do things like get comes out with council tax bills or with bins or whatever it might be. If you can think about the different avenues you've got to let people know about it, because one of the dangers is scammers. People knocking on vulnerable people's doors saying, well, have you heard about this switch off? I need £200 to switch over. And all they do is change their phone or something and walk out. It's really dangerous. And you potentially, at the end of the day, it's not your job. But some councils have decided for the community, they will step in, they will kind of send out comms and stuff. For adult social care, those telecare devices, it's crucial if you can try and get the folks to try and understand, get their neighbours involved, get their friends and family involved, get their carers involved, so they don't just think, oh, what's this old rubbish from marketing, if they can even read it. Okay, I'm going to move on swiftly. These slides are going to be available afterwards, so I won't go through every use scenario. Some communication providers reckon they've got 430 different examples. These slides, I think I've got about 25 on there. Usually in a local authority, and again, this is very broad brush, you may not work like this at all. Highways is a big one. Adult social care is a big one. Facilities management tends to be the big one. because facilities management look after your buildings, highways look after all those road signs and stuff like that. It could be car park barriers, it might be bus stops, where they're just operating a monitoring service. I know some councils have got flooding. I don't know if Essex have, probably not, but some do actually have council responsibility for flooding and things like that. And again, they've got monitors out there. A quick word, if I may, to the wise about what is known as ATA ports, or analog terminal adapter ports. There has been for a long time a push by certain hardware providers to say, do you know what, this is all straightforward, it's all easy, and hopefully it will be. However, what they say is take the existing device you've got, plug it into the back of the router that's sent to you by your provider, and it would just work. From Openreach, our warning is this: that may be the case, but you have to actually have a set of things go right to make that happen. The first is that your provider, and remember there are over 600 out there, may not offer you an analog terminal adapter port on the back of your router. And these pictures, I'm actually in the test lab I run down here in King's Cross today. And in fact, these are pictures off the back of some of the routers we've got from different companies in here, this guy and this Vodafone and so on. As you can see, they come in different shapes and sizes. We do not have any knowledge of which companies will provide these. So if you're with a company that doesn't provide that, you've got nothing to plug into anyway. The second thing is, and this really is a word to the wise, it must be switched on. Sounds obvious, but it isn't part of the core package. It will not work. It has to be part of your phone company. Effectively need to know that you want to use that port. And the third thing, crucially, is that what we have seen time and time again is these ports are for voice. They are voice over IP, VoIP ports. You know, the clues in the name. When you try to plug in machines, whether it's a fax machine, whether it's a burglar alarm, a fire alarm, that are sending tones, Teddy care again, beep, 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 going one way, beep, 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 going the other way. The internet, the IP network doesn't really like it that much. It starts to elongate the tones or shorten the tones. You start to get, and this is the best illustration I've heard, imagine someone playing the piano and they play it beautifully and you think, that's a good, lovely tune, I've got that. Someone else comes along and butchers it and you think, oh, it hurts my ears, but I kind of knew what they were trying to play. Machines don't make allowances. Either they hear it correctly or they don't. And I sat in this test lab by the hour, some very frustrated individuals trying to plug in devices that were made for analog into an IP network through a voice over IP port and finding that you've got two machines are shouting at each other effectively. So from an Openreach perspective, although we do not, and I must make this clear, we don't make routers, so we're not speaking out of turn, we can't turn around and say that one router is better than another. We don't make the routers. We do not recommend them for life-saving or life-critical equipment, because as you can see on the bottom of this slide, these DTMF tones, as they're told, these beep, beep, beep tones, they can get lost, and you do not want someone laying on the floor hoping that these things are going to connect so they get an ambulance turn up. 3 quick call outs then before I finish. Audit. You cannot audit your own estate enough, your own home, your own relatives, your buildings, what you've got. Just think about what you've got and what you're using it for. Number 2, do contact any of your hardware providers, people that you bought stuff for that plugs in. Ask them that question. How will this work in an all IP situation? Everything's like, how is that going to work? And then finally, if you have an account manager, reach out to your account manager, and they may even be on this call, and just say to them, what's the plan, folks, for us? Or how do you make sure that we don't end up with things getting left behind? There are other things that I could talk to you about. I'm going to leave the summary for that. Very briefly, I just want to touch on this. This has become a bigger thing recently. Everything I've talked to you about up until now has been something that we call the All IP program, or you will know it as the PSTN switch off. I started off by showing you, way back on the early slide, these boxes here. And I talked about black box being the one being switched off, the blue box being other providers and so on. And those providers would include Sky, that include TalkTalk, that also include BT Wholesale, who are also putting out their own ADSL service, and also they're doing their own special service for those kind of things like alarms and so on. More information from them directly. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, you are going to have to make a decision. Those things are going to affect you. So going back to what I said earlier, that is one piece of equipment being switched off. Exchange closure or exchange exit is a completely different program. It's coming hard on the heels of this one, and it is going to be closing the whole building down, not just one piece of equipment. Now, the only reason I mentioned that today, and I won't go into any detail because it's, take another hour, which you absolutely don't want here, and we could do it another time if you want to, is it's important to know that there are currently 5 exchanges in a pilot. You can see them on the right hand side there. None of them affect you. There's 3 in Northern Ireland, there's 1 in London in Harrow, and another one out in Oxfordshire. There is a proposal to close another 103 by the year 2030. And as you can see here, there is a big number in the middle slot. They want to get from these 5,500 exchanges to just 960 by the mid-2030s. Now, no panic, it sort of kind of feels like it's a long way off, but just bear in mind that any decision you make today that is an interim solution, you don't go for the whole IP, you go to a network that ultimately gives you a few more years before you've got to make a decision, could actually come back and bite you, because you could end up being in a telephone exchange with the whole building closed in a few years' time, and therefore any decisions you make today may have to be made again. But I'm going to not take any more of your time up on that. I think it's quite enough. So let me stop sharing for a moment, and I think let's just see what the time is doing, and I'll make sure that we can. I don't want to pinch David's time. Let me just see if I can get that. Stop sharing. There we go. So 10:36. So if it's, I mean, what do you want to do, Paul? Do you want me to take a few questions now if there's time, or wait to the panel?
No, I think what we'll do is we'll move on, and it will just give us more time for Q&A at the end, if that's okay. And if David's ready.
Thanks very much. Thanks for your time. Thank you. Over to you then.
Okay, great. Thank you. Try and get the slides back up. Just give me a minute or two to do that. Right. Okay. Let's see if we can find the right slide. Hopefully we can all see this. Right. My screen's gone funny, but can you see the slides?
Still on John's slide 9 at the moment.
Is it? Okay. Let's try again.
I've got slide 7.
I'll stop sharing and do it again. I think that'd be the best way. Right. Okay, we should be there now. Can you see slide 18?
I've got it.
Yeah,
thanks.
Fine, thank you.
Yeah, it's working.
Good. Sorry about that. So anyway, thanks for your patience, and I'm very pleased now to introduce our next speaker, David Christie, who's a senior regulatory policy advisor from Virgin Media O2. And in his role at Virgin Media O2, David is a senior advisor and has been involved with supporting the migration to digital voice from its planning for several years. So his background is as a regulatory lawyer and has worked in both the public and private sectors of regulated industries over the past 25 years. And David is now going to be covering the impact of the PSTN switch off and the impact it will have on from a Virgin Media O2 perspective. So thank you, and over to you, David.
Thanks very much, Paul, and good morning, everybody. So the good news is that I only have 3 slides, so and I only have 15 minutes to talk to them. So it's a lot more brief than John's comprehensive explanation, but actually you'll find it's quite similar. So first slide is just very, very high level summary. Again, what John said, really. The old equipment, maybe not quite as old as my picture suggests, but the old equipment is sitting in our exchanges. So Virgin Media has a separate network to Openreach. It's sitting in Openreach exchanges. It's sitting in exchanges around the world. And this is not a UK specific problem. And it's simply just too old to carry on using. So effectively, if we don't take out the outdated equipment that's there today, we would have a telephone network that wouldn't be reliable going forwards. So all of this project, from Openreach perspective, from a Virgin Media perspective, is designed to ensure that we have a telephone service that's fit for purpose going forward. So no action means unreliable service, and that will cause major problems. The PSTN technology, the public switched technology that John's talked about, is also pretty limited now. It doesn't support all of the new and innovative services that we want to put out there, and that includes moving from copper-based networks to fibre to the home. So these full fibre networks that John's talked about. If you want to take gigabit speed in your home, you get fibre to the home, and those are the ones that don't support traditional voice. So it's modernisation as well. So I've tried to distill everything that's happening on the Virgin Media network onto one slide, and that's the next slide if we just move on to that. So we've got a program, and as John said, the telephone industry in the UK is a little bit complicated. There's the major network provider that covers the whole of the country, which is Openreach, that John's talked to you about, and that will support a lot of CPs. So the likes of BT Retail, or BT Consumer, should I say, the likes of Sky, the likes of TalkTalk, they sit on the Openreach network. And as John said, they are the customers of John's company. Virgin Media has its own network. So we run our own network in parallel to the Openreach network. We don't cover the whole country, cover between a half and 2/3 of it at the moment. And we have a direct relationship with the end user. So we sell directly to you and your homes or businesses up and down the country. So we're in the process of moving our switches in our network from the old analog technology to new digital voice, which is effectively our IP-based technology, between now and 2025. So running to the same timelines as Openreach. And again, that's because a lot of the equipment won't be supported by the switch manufacturers, the equipment manufacturers beyond that date. So that's what's driving that. Where we differ from the Openreach program is Openreach are withdrawing their wholesale product, their wholesale line rental that John described, on the 31st of December 2025. So their customers, the BT consumers of this world, need to run their own program to make sure they have moved their customers in advance of that. On the Virgin Media network, we are going on a switch-by-switch date basis. So switches in our network will have a decommission date, and we published the list back last year in 2022. We'll update dates as these things change. But essentially, when we migrate a switch, so when the switch moves from analog technology to digital technology, all of the customers attached to that switch will also be migrated onto the new technology. We'll tell customers up to a year in advance of that decommission, and give them at least 3 months on a sort of rolling program. So to give you an example, if that doesn't quite make sense, if we were decommissioning a switch in October 2024, we would start writing out in October 2023. So a letter might arrive on your doorstep if you're a residential customer. October 2023, we need you to move you to digital voice, and we'll give you 3 months, and we'll move you in October, November, December, January 2024. So well in advance of the end date. And we use that so that we can split up the process evenly over the course of those months. So everyone gets 3 months, at least 3 months notice. We use multiple comms channels to try and engage all of our customers. So emails, white mail, SMS, outbound calling, calling in person on certain cases, so that we try and really make sure we get everybody engaged. And the 3-month journey is for our standard customers. We have enhanced journeys for both vulnerable customers and also separately telecare customers. And telecare, as John said, is one of the areas that we as an industry have really tried to focus on, because we know that's a particularly vulnerable section of society. They're probably the most difficult segment of customers to get hold of, in terms of they have a relatively high proportion of people who aren't digitally engaged within that sector, a relatively high proportion of people who are more elderly, and a relatively high propensity for treating inbound calls and inbound letters with a degree of caution and skepticism. And we know that there's loads of scam calls, there's loads of marketing that people will ignore, but it's really important to try and get these communications to land and for people to react. Just in relation to telecare customers, we as a company are really committed to trying to ensure we provide the maximum support to those customers. So where we're migrating one of our switches, we'll do a pre-identification through checking alarm receiving center numbers. So have any of our customers called a number that we know is associated with one of these alarm receiving centers? If they have, then they're put in a special dedicated migration batch, a telecare batch, and they get an enhanced journey, and specifically they get supported in terms of trying to engage both the customer and for them to engage their service supplier as well. We also have a data sharing agreement that we've used with local authorities that allows the legitimate passing of personal data, in this case just a telephone number, but personal data between a local authority or a telecare providing company and ourselves as a comms provider. What that will allow is, it will allow us to ensure that we've got captured all of the telecare users in an area that are signed up to a local authority service, but it also helps a local authority then to identify which of its users have a Virgin Media service that's likely to be impacted by a migration in the coming months. So that's the purpose of that data share. And we've worked with local authorities then on a case-by-case basis almost to try and make sure we can provide that additional support. Because when you're looking at the numbers, the bigger the number, the more difficult it is to focus in on individual cases. We know that, and where there's an issue, we want to be able to try and provide that support. We're looking at trying to drive further awareness. We're trying to look at whether local media trials, local media drops work. We've tried to increase the number of face-to-face meetings and really trying to engage. And that's why we think, you know, speaking to you as a county council, a local authority, is really helpful. It raises the profile of this programme, but it also allows you to say, hey, can we get involved with you so that our local residents are more aware of this change coming through to affect them than they would have been. And, you know, awareness is a really, really key driver that we see as very important. Finally, as John said, that this isn't a sales pitch. I don't sell. I'm a lawyer, so you can definitely trust me. My sales colleagues are not even on the call, so I definitely not a sales pitch. But it's just to say, this John and other colleagues from other CPs who aren't here today, we want to work together as an industry to ensure that there is an increased understanding of this change, the migration. We've got some comms in production, so they are designed to support various stakeholders, including local authorities, get the message out there. We know that the LGA has produced comms as well, and those have been referred to by yourselves. And we know that from the introduction, you want a unified way of speaking to both your local residents, but also to central stakeholders like Ofcom and government. And I think the more joined up we can become, the better. And traditionally, going back to the telecare, that's been a real interesting challenge for us as an industry. So we didn't know before this migration typically what customers use their telephone lines for. They might have had a telecare alarm plugged in. They might have had if they're a small business, they might have a point of sale terminal, a payment terminal plugged in. To John's point, they might have had lines, ordered lines, and used them for lift resilience or lift emergency calls. So we've had to increase our knowledge as an industry as to what the products that we supply are actually used for. And that's been quite a challenge. And because that's been a challenge, I think there's still work to be done in trying to flag and communicate the fact that this program, which is a change in how a telephone voice line will be provided, could affect other industries, and trying to bring everybody together through the medium of local authority is a really valuable thing. So that's an overview of the program. In summary, it's in flight now. Switches are being migrated. Customers will be being written to, and they need to know that this is something that they will have to react to. So just to bring that to very much to life, on the next slide, I've set out some of the migration dates we've got in our program. These are the switches that relate to services being provided in and around the broader Essex area. So you can see in Bishop Stortford and Southend, those switches have already been migrated. The switches for Ilford, Basildon, Cambridge, Waltham Park and Colchester are coming up. So we've got, so I'll double check CC1 because I think that might be a 2024 date. Otherwise, that's this month. But they start from quite early on. So people in the Ilford area may well have already been asked to be to migrate. They got their December upgrade date, but they will have been receiving communications. And same for Basildon. So this is an evidence that this is happening now as we speak, and we need to really be able to support those. Where we get to an end date, again, that's where things like the data share agreement, working cooperatively together, can really help, just in case there are perhaps difficult cases or cases where we need to provide some extra support. So subject to me checking that CC1 date, which I'll come back to you with on the chat in due course, that was effectively what I wanted to get across. Bottom line is, hopefully that's been useful in terms of providing the context of what Virgin Media is doing. We would really welcome your support and cooperation, and we're more than happy to pick up the phone, answer an email, and try and make this program as successful and as pain-free as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you both, David and John, for your updates. So we're now going to move on to the Q&A section with the questions from Slido. So for this section, in addition to John and David, who we've already heard from, we're also joined by Chris Pearson, Matul Patel, Tony Alvaranga and David Lansley. And if you do notice a question in Slido that you would like answered, please give it a like, as this will bump the question up our list. And we will try to get through as many questions as possible, as we've got just over half an hour. So to kick off the Q&A, the question at the top we have is, does BT have timescales for the switchover in our regions, as the switchover is being done region by region? Do we have any panelists that would like to tackle this one?
It's David Lansley here. So yes, we do. We are given information about the exchanges to be migrated, and obviously, like our colleagues from Virgin Media, we can provide some dates. Do you want us to give you a list across the whole of the Essex County? I live in Essex myself, so I know the area quite well. We can provide a list of when we're expecting exchanges to go. Is that as simple as you want it to be, or is there more detail that you wanted than that?
I think that would probably be a good start. If you're able to provide us with that, we can maybe send that out when we send out the slides.
Okay, we'll get a list together for you and get that over. Who do you want me to send it to? Do you want me to copy it? Well, when we get it, send it to everyone on the call, or just Paul? Do you want me to put it through you and you distribute to who you want to distribute it? Or?
Yes, please. If you could just send it to me, I'll make sure it gets distributed.
We'll do.
Crossters and Hertfordshire, please.
Sorry, say that again.
across DIS and across Essex and Hertfordshire, please, because this is the DIS that we're talking to.
Yeah, okay, no problem. Jotting that
Okay.
down. Get that list together. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Okay, on to the next question. What about people without a computer or a mobile phone? What will happen in those cases?
Happy to state that from a VM perspective. So the change is to move from analog telephony to IP telephony. That means the telephony will run over the broadband line, but it doesn't mean any customer has to take broadband. So a customer who today is just a phone customer, doesn't have any broadband, they will be, in Virgin Media's case, they will be provided with a hub, same as a broadband customer, but they won't get broadband. They won't pay for broadband. They will just pay for the telephone line. So it's just the way that the phone technology is running, rather than the customer having to take another service.
Okay, perfect. And I think that probably answers the next question, which is how will this affect people that do not have broadband? I assume that is in relation to the phone service. Will they have to have it, and will they be charged for it? So yeah, I think that's answered that as well. Yeah.
It is. I think from just kind of bring it in as well from although it's a communications provider question rather than Openreach question, it will be the same. We're going to a router-centric world, and everything will go through the router, including voice. So whether you plug something in the back of it, or whether you take a voice product specifically, some communication providers give deck phones or sell deck phones particularly to their customers, and they then just basically pair. But again, depending on who you are and how vulnerable you are, that might be more difficult than ever. So, but yeah, everything. If you haven't got a router in future, you won't have a service from this network point of view that we've talked about today.
Okay, perfect. The next question I've got is why is there not a national awareness campaign, as it will benefit the majority?
I think I covered that off, but if you missed it, I would love there to be one. That would be fantastic, make all our lives much easier. The argument, of course, is that, in fact, as I think I mentioned earlier, Sky and TalkTalk, for example, have their own network. Well, sorry, let me phrase that. They have their own equipment exchange. They use an Openreach network, but they do have their own equipment that is not being affected by 2025. So, of course, they're very keen on not having a national campaign that drives millions of people to ask them questions that they actually are relevant to them. It's also true to say that there are obviously people like BT, Vodafone, all sorts of others who actually got their own commercially sensitive plans. So even if you drive them to it, they can't be told them anything. The people that you speak to probably won't be able to tell you anything, which is rather unfortunate. There's also another argument that says some people have already moved over. Millions of people have moved over to New York network. So you don't want to cause a panic and everyone goes rushing off to their provider who can't tell them anything. It's a little bit of a damned if you do and damned if you don't. There is no doubt a national campaign, and people always quote two things to me. They talk about Y2K, which is, I think, quite a good illustration, because very often people say, well, nothing happened at Y2K, and it didn't happen because people got things sorted out. And the second thing, they talk about the TV switch over, and they say, well, wasn't it like that? And of course, it isn't, unfortunately, because for a long time, until quite recently, nobody was talking about anything geographic. But obviously geographic is probably the way to go. BT are now starting to do that, as you've seen there, and I put a link in from one of their websites. And again, the information is not consolidated, it isn't pulled together, it is commercially sensitive. You're not going to get a national campaign as much, quite frankly, as I'd love to see one, because it makes our lives a lot easier.
It's also, sorry, it's David again, David Lansley. There is a programme in BT Consumer to support vulnerable residents and the like, and some of the sort of instances we were talked about today. And there are some events being run by that group. I don't know if you or anyone on the call was invited to that. There was an event in London on Monday. I know Chris and myself can make sure that in future anyone that wants to be invited to those sort of events can be. That there were lots of local government customers at that event. I unfortunately wasn't at it, but I know colleagues that were, and some of the London councils were there that I support as well. We can always make sure you're invited to those events, because obviously that's where a lot of that information might come from. That I know John, you talked about it earlier about sharing information with the vulnerable type customers and things. There's a lot of work being done in BT around that at the present moment, and commitments around what we will do to help support that. So that may be something that we can get you added to that list. It's being run by Lucy Baker at the top of the tree. She's the leader for consumer, and she's the director for that program. So we can definitely get anyone that needs to be added to that and invited to those events as and when they're run. They're not just run once. They're run regularly. Anyone heard me? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, it's okay. No problem. It went quiet. I wasn't sure. There's a lot of background noise. I'm in our office today, so sorry.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So the next question I believe we've got is who is carrying out the audits for ECC and who do we check in with that? I think we are going to take that one away. I believe Doug, the head of digital, is going to answer that one. So if whoever asked that question, could you just put your email in the chat and we can sort that one out with you? And that would be perfect. So the next question after that, it was said BT won't be switching anyone with a healthcare pendant. Could you confirm those with Careline pendants can be identified and excluded at the start?
It's David again, Dave Lansley again. I can't confirm that for sure, but there was a commitment. I've spoken to Lucy, spoke about a moment ago in consumer, and I know they're doing lots of work around that. I believe they're able to identify Careline users. Yeah, we'd need to engage with those guys. Chris, I don't know if you can get engaged with the team there and find that out, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case. But I don't want to commit to that without us, the consumer guys confirming it, because obviously the issue with lots of it. Sorry, John, I think you were going to say something. Won't be a
No,
moment.
I was good. Yeah, go on.
So go on, yeah.
Also,
right, okay.
Do be very careful with this, because remember there are 690 providers, of which BT is one of them.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. Everything I'm saying is from a BT point of view. That's
yeah.
a good
So,
point.
I think a fair bit of credit should go to both BT and Virgin, who worked really hard on the telecare part of it, and have now actually got NDAs in place. They've got systems for collecting data. I think everyone's been stymied by GDPR. I lost it now. Thank you.
GDPR.
Thank you. I lost my D somewhere. And I think that they fought through that and are far more advanced probably than most of the others in terms of that. But it is difficult and it is thorny. Remember that when it comes down to it, the local authority, if you as a local authority share that list, if you can. Now, some have hit brick walls with their legal department and they've just said, no, you can't. GDPR stops you doing it. Some have managed to circumnavigate it through saying it's life critical and therefore some would die if we don't do it. And it does seem to be every local authority depends on how their legal department interprets it, whether they can pass that on. If you've got it and you provide it, I'm pretty sure those communication providers would love to see that. Generally, for the last 5 years, the way that they've tried to collect data is through the Telecare Services Association, writing out to some 176 alarm receiving centres out there saying, can you tell us not the end customer details, because they can't say that again because of GDPR. Can you tell us the phone numbers that are dialed into you from those end customers, so we can try and work out as a communication provider if you are one of those customers. So there's lots and lots been done, but it's not been done across the piece. And don't forget that you're still going to have people with those things, vulnerable people and so on, who are not known. So again, we get very bogged down on telecare for obvious reasons. But if it is someone who just uses the phone by the side of their bed, as I mentioned earlier, as an extension, and they suddenly find it doesn't work because everything's now through their router, you won't know about it. The communication provider won't know about it. So there is danger out there. I think as much as being done, and the more that you can do as a local authority to share that information with those that want it, I think that's a fabulous, great idea. Do manage your expectations. Number one, it isn't every provider out there. And number two, you won't know when that particular end customer gets their letter, because there's no reason for them to phone you up and tell you unless you ask them to. So good work has been done, not 100% proof by any means.
No, thanks for that, John. So next question, what will happen to the small pockets of exchange-only premises?
So I'll pick that one up as well for May. Exchange only, for those that aren't aware, is where you don't have a cabinet. So effectively, most people, it's buildings, a mile down the road, the cable comes out, goes down to a green cabinet in the street, then it comes out of that and goes into your premises. If you live quite close to a telephone exchange building, you probably just have a line that goes straight from the exchange into your premises. There's no cabinet. If there's no cabinet, then obviously you can't put in fibre to the cabinet because there isn't one. So those customers that today are exchange only, depending on where they are in the country, depending on what's being built there, there's a whole raft of stuff out there which we won't be aware of because, again, it's commercially sensitive, will be either on fibre to the premises. So if there is fibre to the premises available, that's where they go. Don't need a cabinet for fibre to the premises anyway. If it is not a fibre premises, then they'll either be offered potentially. In some cases, there are exchange, there are cabinets being built outside exchanges. And my local exchange, for example, up in Norfolk, we actually have got some of those that have been built outside. So they've put a cabinet right outside the exchange, and that then becomes our feed. For others, it may well be they move to what we've talked about earlier, an all copper line residue. You saw that probably on that earlier slide. I said something called SOTAP. So again, these aren't very helpful terms. Do remember that already, from a Openreach perspective, we do provide all copper lines to non-BT folks. I mentioned Sky and TalkTalk earlier, and their equipment is not going to change. But also BT will have their own equipment in the exchanges, their new equipment, and that again will come out on an all copper line. So it could be that if you're exchange only, or if you're in the middle of nowhere and there's no fibre there, you might end up being migrated onto a line that is still with existing copper there, but with an ADSL service provided by one of those providers.
Perfect. Okay, so the next question is, what is the current timescale of switchover after receiving their letter from their CP? So I believe David may have already answered this from Virgin Media 2. I think on a VMO2 you said, was it around a year?
Just to give you an idea from VMO2. So at the moment there are two major providers undertaking migration activity where customers are actively being moved to digital technology. That's Virgin Media O2, which is my company, and BT Consumer. Other companies will be migrating before 2025. As John said, there are multiple CPs out there. I don't know what their timescales are. We at Virgin Media will give a standard customer, so non-vulnerable, non-telecare, 3 months, minimum of 3 months notice. So that will be in some time within that 12-month window when communications are live before the switch end date. But it's 3 months from the first letter to a migration point. If they're a telecare customer, that's extended to 6 months to ensure that there's extra time so that we can then better support that particular customer. Those timings are not mandated by the regulator. Ofcom will say you just need to give customers a reasonable amount of time so that they're not taken by surprise, they can react, they can make appropriate choices and decisions, but they don't mandate a specific time. So it could vary between different providers.
Perfect. Thank you. And then the next question is, what Virgin doing unique to them, or is it being mandated by Ofcom to ensure the additional support is available to all vulnerable users?
Yeah, so we are regulated by Ofcom, and they do set some minimum standards. One of the standards in relation to migration to IP voice, or indeed, if you join a new provider on IP voice, so that could be any provider. It could be if you take a gigabit broadband line from Sky, TalkTalk, BT Consumer, you have to ensure that that customer has the ability to access emergency services. And that is a key part of the Ofcom minimum standard. What they say in practice that means is for regular customers who aren't vulnerable and have a mobile phone, that customer can rely on their mobile phone to call 999 in an emergency. So if there is a power cut in the house, which means that the landline, the digital landline, is no longer working, they would be expected to rely on their mobile. For anybody who identifies as vulnerable, And we have an obligation to ensure our records are marked up so we can flag vulnerable customers. That's across the industry again. That provider has to ensure that that customer has an additional backup so that they can call emergency services in a power cut. Ofcom doesn't mandate what that backup system is. So you could simply have a power supply that supports the broadband router, keeps it live for a short period of time. Virgin Media's solution is to provide a dedicated big button phone that is backed up with a fallback SIM. So it then falls back to the mobile network. And again, that also raises questions. Is this service suitable for customers who live in not spots? Virgin Media will not install to a vulnerable customer in a not spot. So if that's part of the installation test, because that customer would then not have that backup available to them. So it's an important point. That bit is standard across the whole of industry, that backup in a power cut to vulnerable customers. How each CP actually puts that out into practice will differ between individual providers.
Yeah, just to add to that, Dave is right. Everyone's going to do their own thing, but it's an important thing that he also made it clear is that the Ofcom regulation for things like power is to provide the individual with a 1 hour opportunity effectively to phone 999 services. So effectively, they have to find a way of getting through. What it doesn't take into consideration is if that 1 hour is at 2 o'clock in the morning and you don't wake up to 7 o'clock, your hour's already gone. The second thing to remember is that although some providers are providing a battery backup to keep the router alive, it's also important that the fibre to the premises folk are aware that they need to have their wall socket is swapped over, and that also needs power. So you need potentially either 2 battery backups or one with some kind of cable that goes into both. And the final thing, again, as David, I think, eloquently brought out, as a communications provider, it's entirely up to you what you provide. So they may provide you with a battery, they may provide you with a mobile phone. In some cases, they just take the phone number from you. If you say you have a mobile phone, then they will say that is it. That's how you are going to provide. So that's how you're going to phone 999. Don't get caught out in telecare as well. Telecare devices do not phone 999. They phone a call center. So you may find your provider says, well, I'm sorry, I don't have to provide you with anything for that particular line. You're not a person that's down on a critical list. You don't need to phone 999. In emergency, from our point of view, you've got a mobile phone to do that. We haven't got to give you a battery backup, therefore, for your router to phone your call center. So it is a little bit mired. Do watch out for it. Everyone, as David said, will do their own thing depending on their own policy with their own vulnerable customers.
No, thank you very much, John and David, for both of those answers. I think that was really well done. So the next question. Are we as organisations going to incur additional costs to terminate fibre connections to existing sites, or will BT or the operator supply VDSL routers? What are the costs?
So I guess going back to so again, to get this service going forward, you'll need a router if you haven't got one. If you're switched over from that, if you're on one of these lines that are affected, but 9.5 million of them are still left in the UK, 2 years. So if a router is sent to you by your communication provider, clearly they must do that, otherwise you'll have no service. We've not heard anyone offer so far any of those things at a cost because they've got to give you the service. But do be aware of 2 things. Number one, I can't tell you what costs may or may not be around that. It depends between your relationship, your contract, and everything with your provider. But also remember that some providers may not want to go forward with your service. It is possible for a provider to say, well, actually, that particular service, we don't want to carry on selling you. It is only BT under current regulation that have to provide you with a universal service obligation as such to them. So therefore, they must provide service. If other providers turn around and say, well, actually, on that particular line, we don't want to do it anymore, it's too difficult, it's out of the way, whatever, they can withdraw your service and tell you to go somewhere else. It seems unlikely. They want to keep your business, but again, don't assume that someone's sitting there with all these options and solutions. Talk to them, and that's why we keep calling out, audit. Talk to your providers, whether it's your hardware or your phone companies. Effectively, ask them what the plans are for you. Don't get caught out.
Perfect. And we do actually have pretty much exactly the same question to Virgin. Will there be a cost to residents in being migrated by Virgin, whether as increased prices for service or having to purchase new equipment to enable migration?
Yeah, so this sounds like it's a bit more consumer focused. So will a resident have to pay for going through migration? The answer is no. So there may well be additional equipment from the phone side. So a customer who has phone only will have to get a new router. That will come from Virgin. Virgin will not charge that customer for the installation of that router. If they're a vulnerable customer, they would be entitled to the backup line as well. Again, that doesn't come at any cost. That is free of charge. So all of that additional equipment is covered by what the customer currently pays for their landline service. And again, that will not go up as a result of the migration. So there is one call out though, and I think this probably goes cross industry, not just Virgin. So we're supplying our customers with telephone or comms equipment. If the customer has other equipment plugged into that line, that comes from an entirely different industry. So again, going back to the telecare care alarm example, if somebody has an analog care alarm that isn't going to be compatible with a digital line, and they need to replace that alarm unit, that is something that will sit away from Virgin Media, BT, whoever's providing it. So that cost will fall potentially on the care alarm provider, but we do know in some cases that cost has been passed through to end user customers as well. Again, that's something I think that we collectively all need to be aware of, because there are potential cost consequences on that side, certainly for local authorities, but also for end users as well.
Okay. What happens if you live in a listed property and conservation dictate no aesthetic changes to the front of the property?
That's a really good question. I think that probably, just kind of going back from an engineering point of view, in most cases you won't know any different. So if it is fibre to the premises, then there's a chance it'll come in overhead. So if you've got an overhead line already coming in, they'll put in what they call a fibre drop wire. So all they'll do is take the copper one down and put a fibre one, so it look identical. So that shouldn't be a problem. If it's coming in underground, it depends what you've got. So I can't see them digging up all your drive and everything else, because you wouldn't let them. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. So it depends where it's coming, overhead or underground. If it's underground, probably there's already something there. There's already ducting that goes to the premises. It just depends. Everything would depend on the way they can get it into the building. Generally, you don't make any changes to the front of the building unless the customer turns around and says, I have seen this. The customer says, oh, actually it comes down then to my living room. I don't want it there. I want it around the side of the house. If the Openreach engineer can do that for them, they would do that. But it's not something we tend to do. We don't change anything unless we are asked to by the end customer. So I say 100%, but I don't think that's going to be an issue.
Yeah, and so it's similar from the Virgin side, that the network is already into the premise. So typically a premise will be supplied with a voice network, which we're decommissioning, and a broadband network, which we're moving the voice over onto. So actually there's very little need to put anything on the exterior of a building. As John said, you can never rule out edge cases, and obviously if there is a particular consideration for building aesthetics and unlisted buildings, then that's something to flag, I think, with the CP who is providing the service, just to check there's no issue.
And do remember, fibre to the premises is the only thing that's going to be a new line coming into your premises. If it's fibre to the cabinet, so Geo, as mentioned, that's what it becomes after a migration, then the line's already there. There is no change to the master socket. That copper's in situ, goes back there, so you won't see any change anyway. It'll just be pumped down from the local cabinet into the premises, so you won't even need an engineering visit if it's that side of it.
Perfect. Thank you both. Next question. What do Virgin provide elderly residents with if power cuts mean they're isolated? How do they get help? So I think you mentioned this earlier around the mobile option.
Yeah, so our backup, which if somebody's elderly and relies on their landline, they should make sure that they're flagged as vulnerable in our database. So say, yeah, I rely on my landline. They would then be eligible for this backup unit, which in our case is a big button phone. So it's corded, so it doesn't have any power supply going to in fact, it does have a power supply because it's got its as a battery backup to the whole phone unit, but it's corded, plugs directly into the router, and it has a fallback detection. So if the landline goes down, whether that's a network fault or a power outage, the phone will then switch to a mobile network, and it will allow calls to be made over the mobile network. That's both to 999 and 112, but also to other non-premium rate numbers as well. So you can still call friends, family, neighbours in a power outage. And as John said, the minimum requirement that's set by Ofcom is that battery has to last, or battery backup has to last, for at least an hour. The Virgin Media solution has a battery backup that lasts at least 8 hours. So again, it covers our 2 o'clock in the morning power cut. And again, just to go back to that point, the specification and what's provided will vary between different providers. So it's something to be aware of.
Perfect. Has there been any engagement with power suppliers to discuss SLAs for loss of power, given potential increased risk exposure on loss of landlines in power cuts? Is this something that either of you are aware of?
Can you repeat the question
Yes.
again? Sorry, I didn't quite hear his question.
Yeah.
Sorry, David.
So has there been any engagement with power suppliers to discuss SLAs for loss of power?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that there has. So we have various meetings as an industry with our regulator Ofcom, with DCIT as our sponsoring government department, and DCIT have been engaged with BEIS and various other government departments that are also affected by this. So power very much is one of it, both in the context of the power industry being users of communication lines. So they want to know how they're affected by the migration, but also the fact that if you move to a broadband-based system, then there is this increased importance of power resilience at the home premise. And also the increased importance for mobile networks to remain up, because you don't want both a landline and the mobile network to go down because of a power issue. How the power companies are addressing it is obviously a matter for them, but they are aware of the switchover. We have been involved in multiple discussions, and power resilience, especially in light of the Storm Arwen the other winter, is definitely a key topic that is being discussed.
Absolutely. I would just add to that the fact that we are going to be a country completely power centric. So even our vans, remember, going forward are going to be electric. If we don't have electricity, we're not going to be able to drive out to even fix faults. So we are going on a very different trajectory than we've been in the past. There's no doubt there are massive advantages. But whichever way you look at it, the UK, for very good ecological reasons, are moving to a power centric paradigm effectively, and we're all going to be relying even more in future. Particularly interesting what's happening recently over the years about getting our own power and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be even more essential to keep our comms alive and kicking going forward.
Perfect, thank you. So the next question we have is for ECC actually. Who at ECC is lobbying government for funding to support residents who face bearing costs of switchover with careline equipment doubling in costs? If whoever asks that question, if you're able to share your contact details with us, we can take that away and look at that for you. And then the next question was, will the slides be shared after the event? Yes, we will be doing that. If you have an old style socket and not the existing BT master socket, will the VDSL router still work?
That's a very interesting question. It depends what you mean by an old style socket, I guess. So generally, I don't know, I've got one here. I've got more around the wall. I'll drag it around the wall. So effectively, if you tend to have a little white box known as an NT5A, and that's the one where you just had a single socket and you had to put a kind of a filter in it, and that filter then gave you something to put your broadband in and something to put your phone in. Most of us these days we've got what they call a 5C socket, and that's got both. It's got a left hand socket on it, which is for the broadband, and one on the right, which would have been for the phone before, of course, this changeover goes forward. If you've got anything else, I'm not quite sure why you've got it, to be honest, because it's probably the master socket from our point of view is where we end up. So if you've got something that's been done by your mate, the DIY expert, or whatever it is, you're probably on sticky ground. But ultimately, any socket you've currently got that Openreach have put in, whether it is via a filter that you've already got, or whether it's by one of these new sockets, you should be fine. If you can plug in broadband today, plug a router in, you should better plug it in tomorrow.
Perfect. So does this work with the Phone Guardian service? Some say they can't get through now.
I think is that a BT product, the Guardian service? Is that one of yours, David?
Yeah, I don't recognise. I recognise the name, but not specifically. If I don't know who asked the question, if they can provide some more details, I'll go do some looking. And what they can't do, is it just they can't dial the number? Is it a local number, a free phone number, or something that they're dialing?
I don't know. Yeah, I'll see if we can get more. If whoever raised that question, if you could ask, supply some more information, that'd be really good. Thank you.
Yeah, by all means, and I'll try and answer it.
I think I recognise that. If similar to what I have at home, if my mother receives a call that's not on her list of people, you have to say your name and press the hash button. That will then ring her phone. Then when she answers it, she will hear you have a call from XXX.
Right.
And she presses 1 to accept what this time, press 2 to always accept that call.
Yeah, that's BT Call Protect, David. That's a free service we offer on telephone services.
Maybe we need to find out if that's going to be able to be used going forward, because I'm assuming it's using the CLI to recognise and with an IP call, what detail they can get from that to be able to still use that function.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. I think we're coming close to the end, so we'll probably only have time for a couple more questions. So if you do have any more, we'll get through a couple more, but if you do have any more, please either continue putting them in Slido or send them to our email at digital@essex.gov.uk. I'll put that in the chat in a minute, and we will make sure to respond to you. So just a couple more. BT cease requests are really difficult to process and take an age to complete. Is BT going to improve this to allow organisations to rationalise services?
I can say that one. Chris Pearson here. So I'm speaking on behalf of BT Business. So for our public sector customers and corporate customers, we have various different cease request processes. One of the things which can make that process quite, I guess that can stretch out that process quite a long time, can be the lack of information. Obviously, we appreciate lines and services may have been installed 20, 30 years ago. So obviously those people who originally procured them or installed those services may not be within that council or that organisation. So that may cause a bit of a delay. One of the things I will say is just engage with your account manager, which if you're Essex, that's myself. We will assign migration specialists to work with you to then provide that audit, to go through your estate with you, highlight those lines, highlight different services, and then work with you to create a cease process schedule to then submit those with the correct information. But it does come back to the information that comes along with that cease. So that's going to be things like the postcode, the billing, where it's installed, and potentially an on-site contact, not necessarily that they're going to have to be on site, but someone that then can receive those updates. But if you do engage with your account manager, they'll be able to create that kind of schedule for you, update you on the cease request process, exactly what the steps are to get that service ceased. So once you understand that, that'll also hopefully speed it up a bit better as well.
Yeah, hi, sorry, Josh. Just to go on from that, I've already done the engagement. It's Keith from Colchester City Council here. The problem we have is that the cease process is offboarded to India. You're offshoring, so a lot of the processes are delayed, lack of communication once we've submitted the correct cease form with all the relevant information. So that process is slow, it's cumbersome, and very difficult to get information because the process is offshored.
No, I appreciate it, Keith. Keith, I do think we've spoken before. So what I'll do is I'll reach out to you after this call, and we can have a chat, and we can just sort of I can try and assist and help with any of the current CCs you've got in progress at the moment, and help you manage that process.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keith and Chris, for that. I think as we've come to 11:30, I think we're going to close it down there. I'd just like to say thank you very much to both John and David for their presentations today, and all the panelists that helped answer the questions. Yeah, and if you do have any more, please continue to put them in Slido or send them to the email that I believe Paul's added into the chat. We will look to answer all of those, and those that have been raised, we will look to send answers on those. But yes, thank you everyone. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.
Good, but worry.